Hello, everyone, and welcome to Single Login for Developers. I'm Tim Knox. I'm a senior consulting engineer at Jamf that's focused on industry solutions. And joining me today will be Sean, Aaron, and Chris, who are going to introduce themselves a little bit later on. Today, we'll be showing off single login, the new single login feature for Jamf Setup and Reset. Now, if you want some hands-on during JNUC, there's an interactive lab that goes over how to get it set up in your environment in just a few hours from now, Thursday, if you're watching this live. And I strongly encourage you to go to this session. It'll show you everything you need to know on the Jamf side to get it working in your Jamf environment. And there's even some hands-on. It's pretty slick. So today, we're going to talk about Jamf Setup for developers. Now, provisioning can be complicated, and there are many paths it can take. Roles, identity, shared devices, one-to-one devices, and eventually needing to reset the device, either by the end of a shift, the end of the life cycle of the device, or even mid-shift if something like that needs to happen in your particular environment. We aren't here to talk about the previous versions of the two apps, but I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about where we started. A few years ago, our first crack at trying to solve the shared iPad question was to break down the shared method by role as opposed to identity. These two apps were more about customization than personalization. The functionality still exists in those apps, so if you're looking for a way to trigger a role-based profile without the personalization part, you still can. The user can open Setup, select the role, which would then populate the extension attribute in Jamf, which would then trigger whatever automation you're looking for based on those smart groups. The device falls into a new bucket, reveals the apps or hides them or whatever, and then when the shift is over, the user would open Reset and nuke the device back to the activation screen. It's a pretty big hammer, but the only way to absolutely guarantee that whatever data the user put on that device is totally gone. But that leaves us with some problems that our customers, you all on this call, wanted us to solve. Once you open Setup, you would still need to open each app and log in. Now imagine you're starting a busy shift at a restaurant or retail shop, and before you can hit the floor to do your job, you have to open each app and sign in. It's annoying and time-consuming. Not to mention restricting access to those roles. Without a way to prove you are the user that you say you are, there isn't any stopping anyone from selecting Big Boss in Setup and getting elevated access to the device. And then there's the reset problem. Wiping a device is a big ask for your users if all you want to do is log people out of your app. Yes, there are still going to be workflows where you will want to wipe the device between users. I'm thinking about devices that are in patients' hands in hospital systems and things like that. Clearing all data will always be better in those examples. But if you're working at a yogurt place, wiping a device is probably too much. So now we've added this new workflow. The new workflow, which I'll show a video of here shortly, you would open Setup, and at the beginning, it could prompt you to start a device level passcode before you get any further. It's not a requirement, totally optional. You can even do biometrics where you can do your Face ID or Touch ID or whatever. And then you would then be granted access to then log into your device, and that passcode is cleared afterwards. You'd log in with Azure, which Sean's going to talk about at great length here shortly, which will then create the single sign-on token and be able to pass that to supported apps, which is really what we're here to talk about today. So I promise we're going to get to that soon. Developers adding it to their apps so that this experience will pass the sign-on to those apps and then sign you in and have that single sign-on experience. And at the end, tapping Reset to revoke those tokens, to clear the single sign-on session, remove the extension attribute, and go straight back to null again. So let's talk about what it looks like in a video. There are a few things you need to have on the device in order to get it working. In this example here, I've got this one app, single sign-on demo kit, which Aaron built. We'll hear from him a little bit later. An authenticator in shared device mode. Today, it requires some level of authority in order to put it in shared mode. Ideally, that's not a future release, but today, as we're talking, that's required. The single sign-on demo kit is currently signed out. So I am going to now open Setup, and I'm going to be prompted for my Azure credentials. And I'm going to sign in using a user that has two credentials assigned, two roles assigned to them in Azure, because I want to show you the pick list. That could be one role, could be multiple roles, it could be 0 roles. That's really up to you and how you want to do your own identity piece within your own identity provider, in this case, Azure. I'm going to type in my password. And then what you'll see after this has been gone through is it will go, okay, I know who you are, you're user 2. And I know you have two roles assigned to you, a nurse, and I think it's a pharmacist, but we'll find out here together in a second. I was right. Now, when you select nurse, you can then reveal the apps. It populates the extension attribute. It does all those things that Jamf has always done with setup, or it could be done automatically, as I said, if you've only got one role assigned. And now it's in the appropriate bucket. So we've got the right wallpaper. We've got those apps. And when you open the single sign-on, we're signed in. It's user 2. That app accepts that single sign-on experience, and now we're signed in. You can see we collect a bunch of data, at least that app does. And at the end, we open reset, and we tap to end the shift. That will then clear the single sign-on extension. It removes that nurse field, puts it back in that null smart group, and you're back to the beginning again, signed out of all of your apps if your apps support the single sign-out experience. There are a few, I didn't tap these things, that's all right. Live recordings. These are all the experiences you have. Cloud IDP, role-based access, single sign-on across the apps, and then you log out fresh. There are some things you need to put in Jamf. We're going to go into greater detail, but I want to just do a quick, this is what it is. There are 2 bits of information we need from your Azure team that we populate in the Jamf setup managed app config section. There's a couple key string pairs. You could literally put that into your existing deployment along with the other requirements, and it would start working. The lift on the Jamf side is very, very light. You also have to have Microsoft Authenticator, as you saw. Microsoft Authenticator has to be in shared mode, and there's a managed app config setting that has to go into those managed app in order to make that work. And of course, the config profile from Apple, it's all Apple native. It's their extension attribute. We're just populating it with the required fields in order to get it working. And there are 2 major underlying technologies for this to work. The Apple native single sign-on framework, and then the Microsoft Enterprise single sign-on plugin for Apple, which is currently in preview at the point of recording today. But in order to get into more detail of that, I'm going to ask Sean Rabbit to talk about his piece, and I'm going to hand it over to him now. Sean?
Thanks, Tim. Hi, I'm Sean Rabbit, Senior Consulting Engineer for Identity here at Jamf. And if you're a fanboy, you'll notice that I'm in yet another location recording. Thanks, climate change. Had to escape from the fires. So the single sign-on extension, what is it? The single sign-on extension basically instructs iOS, iPadOS, or macOS to intercept and redirect authentication requests to a different location than when set up in redirect mode. Basically, any application doing a request for a token of some form, if that's OAuth, OpenID Connect, OIDC, or SAML, or it's doing a specific API library like the identity provider for the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MCEL, that'll be intercepted and directed instead to the app installed on the device to handle authentications. So here we can see a sample payload for the single sign-on extension in Jamf Pro. Now, in this case, we define the extension identifier, which is the bundle ID of the app we'll be handling the authentications. So sign-on type is defined as redirect to redirect requests sent to the URL sign-in pages for the identity provider. And in this case, we intercept the standard public US endpoints for Azure. In the custom configuration area, we can define attributes specific to the identity provider, or we can define a list of application bundle IDs, which should be forced to redirect requests. In this sample, we can see that the application with the bundle ID of com.aaronmaxim.sso-demokit will be forced to use the single sign-on extension. Some authentication APIs will use these URLs and be intercepted by the extension automatically. For example, if your application is using the Microsoft Authentication Library, or MCEL, the bundle ID of your app does not need to be included in this custom configuration. Using MCEL makes it a lot easier on your end user administrators, not needing this setup step here in Jamf Pro. Now, before we go too far, a pet peeve of mine, just a quick acronym and initialism translator for you. There is an awful lot about the identity space that overly complicates things that are really basic concepts. And let's take, for example, the idea of just tokens. So A token, not every authentication method out there is going to use each of these tokens. SAML, for example, smushes a lot of these together into one XML formatted response. OIDC, or OpenID Connect, separates them into their own replies formatted in JSON, for example. But the idea is generally the same. An access token is literally just that, a ticket to access something. That could be an access token that lets this person get into Microsoft OneDrive or log into their Gmail account, the native iOS mail application. An access token is good for a set period of time. So when the access token expires, the user is logged out of the service. And just like your ticket for Disneyland is only good for one day, when the park closes, you need to leave. The default for Azure, for example, is 30 days on an OAuth token and 60 minutes on a SAML token. The identity provider may also invalidate the identity token when it determines a security event has happened, like a password was reset. Now, to get another token, you get what's called a refresh token. And a refresh token allows you to present this token to the identity provider to get a new set of tokens, sort of a rain check for Disneyland. The refresh token is used before the access token expires to get a new access token, and another refresh token be used in the future. Just like the access token, the identity provider may also invalidate the refresh token when it determines a security event has happened. Now, in OpenID Connect, you have a unique identity token. An application can use its access token to ask the identifier to hand over an ID token. And this ID token is very much like your driver's license or a passport, and it contains information about the user. Now, not every application needs to know the information in the identity token. If an app just needs to know you're authorized to use a service, they don't need to ask too many questions. Now, another common phrase you'll hear about tokens is the concept of a claim. A claim is simply a piece of information. On this sample state of Nevada driver's license, we have several claims. Line 1, for example, is the user's last name. Line 4D is marked as driver's license number and contains a unique identifier. And for most identity providers, the claim used as a unique identifier is the name ID field. The name ID usually is in the form of an email address, or UPN, or user principal name. Depending on how your system is set up or federated with a classic on-premises directory server, it could be a short name. And a token could be customized to have both an on-prem short name and a UPN. Now, many identity providers can add additional information with the optional claims in the identity token. So on this example license here, we see in the lower right corner, the fact this person is a veteran is optionally added to the license. Now, the fact that this person is a veteran has no impact whatsoever on their ability to drive, but it's an option. Claims can include information like an on-premises short name, a date a password expires, or a role added for a specific function of a client application. Sounds familiar, kind of like Jamf setup. Using the identity token can lead to some interesting scenarios too, of course. So this driver's license, for example, does exactly one thing. It grants the person the right on the public roads of the state of Nevada. However, because the aviation industry trusts the state of Nevada, it's federated your identity validation out to Nevada, and it will let you through TSA checkpoints to get on a plane for some reason. Your application will use the access, identity, and refresh tokens in similar ways. Your app trusts that organization has vetted its users, and it can trust the identity presented. What you do with that identity is entirely up to you and your app. So no matter which identity provider's single sign-on extension you're deploying to a client device, every identity provider will have an authentication application. This app is responsible for determining if a user needs to sign in for the first time. It'll keep a cached copy of these credentials in the app, and it will keep them up to date. Lastly, handle the requests for credentials from other apps and web browsers on the device. If your client application would normally sign into a service with SAML endpoint, for example, the Authenticator app would know that it's already got a signed-in user and will present a SAML XML response to the client application. And finally, let's dig into the secret sauce of Microsoft Authenticator. Authenticator acts as an authentication app for the Microsoft single sign-on extension for enterprise, and builds upon that with additional functionality. Authenticator also adds functionality like passwordless authentication and some other features. And lastly, unique to Azure and Authenticator is the idea of this shared device mode. Basically, it's a sign out button. Originally, the SSOE extension was designed for one-to-one deployment of a device to a user, but shared device mode assumes many users for a single device instead. And here's where it gets complicated. So you remember how your application asked for a token earlier? Well, that access token may not expire for a while. So the default time to live for an OAuth token is 30 days. But if we have a logout button for a single sign-on extension now, you're suddenly in an interesting situation. You have a valid access identity and refresh token, but the user has logged out. It is the responsibility of the individual application to determine the status of the current user on shared devices. If your app relies only on the validity of the access token, you could have a scenario where a user is logged into your app, but the user is logged out of the device, or the user switched to a different user. Depending on your application and what data it accesses, you may have a potential exposure of patient health information or customer financial information to unauthorized users. So, to avoid this issue, the Microsoft Authentication Library adds functions to let you check that access. And to talk more about the Microsoft Authentication Library, here's Aaron Maxim.
Thanks, Sean. Hello, this is Aaron. I'll be spending the next few minutes looking under the hood of a Jamf internally developed app called SSO Demo Kit. This app is used to test and demonstrate the single login workflow using Jamf Setup and Jamf Reset. SSO Demo Kit is based off sample code provided by Microsoft, which is located in the Microsoft Authentication Library for iOS repository in GitHub. The repository contains all the documentation and libraries to get started integrating MSOL into your amazing apps. A short link to the repository is on the bottom of the slide. I'm going to guide you through a few important MSOL methods while showing the end user experience. Let's get started. SSO Demo Kit has two basic views. The first to display if the current user has a valid token by authenticating to a predefined web page. And the second tab displays details such as the device shared mode. The code snippet on the right is returning that the device is in shared mode as opposed to private mode. This may come in handy to present specific app UI elements if your app supports both one-to-one and shared device usage modes. Now, user 1 logs in to Jamf Setup and launches SSO Demo Kit. We see a successful login using SSO. Using the code snippet, the app is silently logging in user 1, since the token provided by Jamf Setup is stored in the token cache and is valid. In the second tab, the app authenticates to the Microsoft Graph API, which responds with user 1's account attributes. The app also displays the actual token and any token claims. It's time for user 1 to end her shift by signing out using Jamf Reset. User 2 is now beginning his shift, signs into Jamf Setup, chooses a role, and then launches SSO Demo Kit. We now see that user 2 has successfully logged in and is recognized as the current user. It is extremely important that the app recognizes that a different user is now signed in. The code snippet retrieves the current and previous, if available, accounts. The app developer needs to implement logic to ensure user data is secure. For example, when an app comes into the foreground, the app can validate if the current user is different than who previously launched the app, and then act accordingly. User 2 is now ending his shift and signs out using Jamf Reset. We just showed a standard single logon workflow using Jamf setup and reset. Let's use SSO Demo Kit to interactively sign in a user using the code snippet. That makes a call, Graph API, and displays the response's keys and values. In the first tab, the app further validates the token via browser. Now it is time to remove the token and clear the UI. The code snippet signs out a specific account. In this case, it is the current user. By removing the token from the cache, the app developer needs to handle the UI and any other remnants of user data. By using side by side with MSOL methods, hopefully you gain more insight into how third-party single login apps can be designed to make end users' lives easier while keeping user data secure. Now back to Sean.
Thanks so much for that, Aaron. So if you're new to using Microsoft Azure Active Directory, here's a couple little tips. Azure Active Directory does double duty to be both the place where a list of users and groups exists, and can authenticate as well a list of application objects to tell our apps where to go for authentication needs. Applications like Jamf Setup and Reset use a OIDC or OpenID Connect endpoint for authentication, and they get the expanded identity token not available in OAuth or SAML. OIDC applications are defined in app registrations under Azure Active Directory. By registering an app, asking Azure Directory to make a URL where our app can ask to log in, and telling the app registration where to send the results. This URI is usually in a scheme like the name app:// some ingestion endpoint where Azure will send a token. Now, for other types of applications out there like SAML and OAuth applications, you actually go to Azure Active Directory and go to Enterprise Applications. And this is where you will also go into the app registrations name and assign users to all types of applications. This interface, of course, is subject to change because Microsoft changes things all the time. Now, following the instructions in the Jamf Setup Guide, you'll be walked through the steps of assigning a redirect URI, grabbing the application ID, grabbing the tenant or directory ID, and creating roles your users will be assigned to when they log in. And of course, your application may work slightly differently depending on how your app registration is created. Once an app is defined in the app registration, and Azure now has an additional area for enterprise applications, this is where you would pick where the users log in and which role will be assigned to when they log in. Now, if a user is a member of your organization is not assigned here, they'll be shown the default list of roles in the app config for Jamf Setup, and we'll talk about this a little next. It may be useful for an organization where someone may be asked to perform an action they're not normally assigned to, like an emergency. So for a healthcare organization, for example, it might be all hands on deck for anyone and everyone to help come check in patients in a mass triage event. Now, alternatively, you may want to lock users out from the device completely, even if they're members of your organization. And in this case, you'll simply want to just define an invalid or not assigned role in the app config for Jamf Setup to keep people out of these devices. At this point, let's go back to Chris Ball.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, I'm Chris, a Solution Partner Engineer here at Jamf. I provide support to developers who are working on single login integrations as part of Jamf's Solution Partner Program. We've talked a lot about the components used for logging into Jamf Setup, but logging in is only half of the equation. Let's talk a little bit about logging out with Jamf Reset. What looks like a simple tap of the big red button is actually a complex series of automations that is totally invisible to the end user. As Sean and Aaron mentioned, it's important that single login applications check the single sign-on extension status on application launch. This way, the app will realize the next time it is launched that the token is no longer valid and the session should be logged out to make the app ready for the next user. But what if we can't wait until the next time a user opens the app to perform the logout on the back end? This could be the case for apps that send push notifications to its users, for example. Apps that can't wait until the next launch need to be made aware of the logout event immediately. To achieve this, Jamf Pro webhooks can be configured to post the event information to a callback URL on the backend service when the user presses the logout button in Jamf Reset. The request body that is sent will contain information about the event that occurred, the device it occurred to, and other supporting information required to fully perform the logout. To learn more about webhooks, check out the webhooks guide on the developer portal. Jamf's developer portal is home to references and guides that surround Jamf's developer tools, and single login is no exception. The guide for single login breaks the workflow down into its base components and explains how they interact with each other, making it the best place to start when you begin building a single login solution with Jamf. And as you begin building an application that leverages the single login framework, please consider joining one of our partner programs. These partner programs exist to provide appropriate Jamf resources for partners to leverage when building the latest and greatest Jamf integrations and tools. If you're interested in joining, please check out the partner program's homepage for more information. And once you do have a solution that you want to share with our community, list it on the Jamf Marketplace. The Marketplace is for everybody, and it is Jamf's source of truth for third-party integrations and solutions for Jamf customers. Single login solutions developed by Jamf partners land on the Marketplace for Jamf customers to view, and we expect to see more solutions listed as more partners join us on this journey to combat login fatigue and support shared device scenarios. Check out the Marketplace today at marketplace.jamf.com. And that's it for the presentation. If you have any questions, make sure that they are asked in the Q&A section of the JNUC 21 platform, and we will be sure to follow up with you. The links on this slide are resources that were mentioned in the presentation and will also be made available in the session handout. Join Tim later today as he leads an interactive lab to learn more about getting started with single login. Thank you so much for your time. We hope your JNUC experience has been incredible so far. Have a great day and enjoy your next session.